All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving deep into something that seems like you have a ton of questions about based on what we're seeing, and that's daylight saving time in 2025.
Yeah, we saw some pretty interesting search terms like daylight savings 2025 Trump definitely piqued our curiosity.
You got that right. So we're going to sift through all those articles you sent our way and try to pull out like the juiciest bits about DST.
Yeah, you want to know the history, the drama, maybe even some surprises along the way? We got you covered.
Absolutely. But before we get into all that, let's start with a super quick refresher, just so we're all on the same page. What exactly is daylight saving time?
Okay, so imagine you could stretch daylight like a rubber band, right?
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Basically, that's what DST is. In the summer, we spring forward an hour so we have more daylight in the evening.
Makes sense. So are you telling me we just decided to mess with time to have longer barbecues?
Well, not exactly. But speaking of messing with time, gotta make sure we're all clear on the key dates for 2025, right?
Right. Don't want anyone accidentally showing up late to anything.
Uh-huh.
When do we spring forward and fall back?
So for 2025, we spring forward on Sunday, March 9th at 2 a.m. local time, and we fall back on Sunday, November 2nd, again at 2 a.m. local time.
March 9th and November 2nd. Got it. But I got to ask, this whole messing with the clocks thing, got to be older than just barbecues, right?
Oh, way older. You'd be surprised. The idea of daylight saving time has been around way longer than you might think.
Older than sliced bread.
You could say that. Actually, Benjamin Franklin, yeah, the kite guy, he first tossed around a similar idea back in 1784.
Whoa, 1784. That's like crazy early. But it didn't become a thing everyone did until much later, right?
Yeah, it wasn't until World War I that countries started seriously considering it. They were looking at ways to conserve energy, and shifting the daylight hours seemed like a good idea to cut back on using artificial light.
Ah, that makes sense. But wait, one of your searches mentioned modern studies. Are you hinting that maybe this whole energy-saving thing isn't as big of a deal as we thought?
You're sharp. Yeah, some of the research suggests that the energy savings from DST might not be all that significant, at least not in the way we thought. For example, a 2017 study in Australia found that while DST did lead to a tiny decrease in electricity use, it also caused an increase in natural gas consumption for heating. So yeah, kind of complicated.
So it's not just as simple as, like, flipping a switch and boom, energy saved.
Nope, not that easy. There are definitely some nuances to consider. And speaking of nuances, let's talk about the DST debate, shall we? People have some strong feelings about this.
Oh yeah, I've seen those articles. It seems like folks either love it or absolutely hate it. No middle ground there.
It's true.
Yeah.
So ready to jump into the ring and see why people are so passionate?
You bet. Let's start with round one. Reasons people love daylight saving time. Go.
All right. So like we talked about, energy conservation is a big one, even though the evidence is kind of shaky. But people also say DST is great for being outside and doing fun stuff.
I mean, who doesn't love those long summer evenings?
Exactly. Longer days mean more time for barbecues, going for walks, just enjoying the extra sunlight. Plus, some studies even say it might reduce traffic accidents because there's more daylight during rush hour.
Longer summer evenings, less chance of getting into an accident. I can see why people like that. But I know you've also seen the articles that are, shall we say, less enthusiastic about DST. So hit me with it. Why do some people hate it so much?
Well, the biggest complaint, and I think this resonates with a lot of folks, is the disruption to sleep. That sudden time change, especially in the spring, can really mess with our body clocks. Makes it harder to fall asleep, wake up more during the night, and just feel generally more tired, even after a full night's sleep.
Oh, tell me about it. I know I'm always dragging for a few days after that spring forward.
And it's not just anecdotal. There's a ton of research showing a link between DST and all sorts of health problems. Like, you sent in an article about a study that found a 25% increase in heart attacks the week after the spring forward change.
Whoa, 25%. That's not messing around.
Yeah. Pretty scary stuff. And it's not just health stuff either. There are economic concerns too. Some businesses really struggle with the time changes, especially those that work across different time zones or need super precise scheduling. You even sent over a study about the airline industry, where the time changes were causing more flight delays and using up more fuel.
Wow, I never thought about how air travel would be affected.
It's all connected. It's crazy how this seemingly simple act of changing the clock can have such a huge ripple effect.
I'm with you there. It's mind-blowing. But before we get too lost in the ripple effects, I'm curious, what's your personal take on all this?
Yeah.
Are you pro-DST, anti-DST, or somewhere in between?
That's a tough one. I mean, you've clearly done your research and sent us some seriously thought-provoking stuff. What's your take so far?
Well, I'm definitely starting to see both sides of the coin. Like, I love the idea of longer summer evenings, but those health risks are nothing to sneeze at. It seems like there's a lot more to this whole DST thing than meets the eye, right?
Absolutely. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot more to unpack, so buckle up.
Yeah, it really does seem like there's a lot more to think about here. One thing that really stood out to me from all the articles you sent is how much this DST thing messes with our sleep.
It's pretty wild, right? Like, our bodies have this internal clock, called the circadian rhythm.
Circadian rhythm.
Yeah, and it controls all sorts of things, like when we feel tired, when we wake up, even our body temperature.
So basically, our body's own personal timekeeper.
Exactly. But when we spring forward for DST, it's like we're messing with that clock big time, forcing it to adjust to this new schedule.
Ah, so that feeling of being totally wired but also exhausted after the time change, that's my circadian rhythm being like, what the heck is going on?
Pretty much. It's trying to play catch up with this new time, and that can lead to a whole bunch of sleep problems, trouble falling asleep, waking up more during the night, or just not feeling rested even after sleeping for a full 8 hours.
Ugh, I hate that feeling. And, you actually sent an article about a study that found people are way more irritable, less focused, and even more likely to get into accidents the week after the spring forward change.
Oh, yeah, that one was interesting. And there's a lot of research backing that up. Like, we were talking about this heart attacks earlier. That's a real thing.
Yeah, that's pretty freaky.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if those extra hours of daylight are worth it if it's messing with our health that much.
It's a valid question for sure. And then there's the whole economic side of things, too, which I hadn't really thought about before.
Right. You sent over some info about how DST can actually hurt businesses, especially those that work across different time zones.
Yeah, some industries really rely on precise timing and schedules, and those time changes throw a real wrench in the works. And even for places that benefit from the extra daylight, like those outdoor restaurants and stuff, there are still costs associated with, like, lost productivity and accidents. Remember that airline study you sent?
Oh, yeah, the one about the flight delays and extra fuel consumption.
Exactly. It just goes to show that there's this ripple effect, One seemingly small change can have these big, unexpected consequences.
Definitely makes you think twice about the whole thing.
Yeah.
But you also sent some stuff about how technology is changing things up.
Right. I mean, think about it. Our phones and computers automatically adjust for the time change, so in a way, we're not as tied to the sun's schedule as we used to be.
That's true. Like, I barely even notice the time change on my phone anymore.
Yeah.
But you also pointed out that not everyone's glued to their devices 24/7, right?
Exactly. Some people still rely on analog clocks or just aren't as plugged into the digital world, and they might feel the effects of the time change much more strongly.
Right, so it's like this digital divide thing almost, where some people benefit from the technology while others are left behind.
Yeah, something to think about for sure. We can't just assume everyone's on the same page when it comes to technology.
So after diving into all this research, where do you stand on the whole DST debate? Good thing, bad thing, necessary evil?
It's really tough to say. There are such strong arguments on both sides. It seems like we're at this point where we have to figure out, as a society, what's most important. Those potential benefits or those potential risks and disruptions.
And the future of DST seems pretty up in the air right now. We talked about those states that want to ditch the time change altogether but are waiting on the federal government.
Yeah, it's a bit of a waiting game. And even at the federal level, it's like a tug of war. You send some articles about different lawmakers. Some want to get rid of DST, some want to make it permanent nationwide, and others just want more research to figure out what's best.
Sounds like a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
But from what I gathered, it seems like the general public is just as divided as those politicians.
Oh, absolutely. You know that poll you sent over? The one about whether people support making DST permanent?
Yeah, I remember that one.
Well, it showed that a little more than half of Americans are in favor of ditching the time change, but there's still a big chunk who would rather just stick with standard time year-round.
It's crazy how such a seemingly simple thing can spark so much debate. Like it's just changing the clock.
Right. But it goes deeper than that. It's about our routines, our health, our work, even our culture. It's like changing the rhythm of our lives.
I like that, changing the rhythm of our lives. And you know what? Your research also brought up something I think gets overlooked a lot.
Yeah.
The global perspective on all this.
Yeah. The U.S. isn't the only country dealing with this DST dilemma. In fact, the European Union is having their own debate about getting rid of it, and their decision could impact the whole world.
Wow. So it's not just a local issue, it's a global one.
It really is. And the outcome could affect international trade, travel, even political relationships.
That's mind-blowing. It really makes you realize how interconnected everything is, even something as seemingly basic as time.
It really does. And you know what? After all the research you sent, I'm struck by how much we still don't know about the full impact of DST. It seems like there's a lot more research that needs to be done before we make any big changes.
I agree. We need to be careful and consider all the angles before making any decisions. So before we wrap up, just a quick reminder for everyone listening. Those key dates for 2025 are Sunday, March 9th at 2 a.m. local time for springing forward,
Yeah.
and Sunday, November 2nd at 2 a.m. local time for falling back. Mark those calendars.
So, like, where do we go from here? It feels like we're kind of stuck in this DST limbo.
Well, you sent over those articles about California and Florida, right? They passed laws to make DST permanent, but they're still waiting on the okay from the feds.
Ah, so it's a waiting game. But what about at the national level? What's going on in D.C. about all this?
You sent a really interesting article about the Sunshine Protection Act, and they just reintroduced it in the Senate this year. It would basically make DST permanent across the whole U.S., if it passes, of course.
Okay, so there's a chance it could actually happen. But based on what you've seen, does it seem likely that it'll actually become law? It's hard to say. Your research shows just how split Congress is on this. There's some really strong opinions on both sides. Some lawmakers are all about the potential benefits for businesses and recreation, while others are super worried about the health and safety risks.
So it's a political hot potato.
You got it. And it's not just Congress either. The public is pretty divided, too.
Yeah, you're right. Remember that poll you sent? The one
That's
about whether
about-
people want to make DST permanent?
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It showed that a little over half of Americans would be happy to ditch the time changes, but a pretty big chunk would rather just stick with standard time year-round.
I guess some things just hit a nerve, right?
They do, and this one really gets to people's routines, health, jobs, even their sense of what's normal. It's like messing with the fabric of everyday life.
It's true. You also sent over some stuff about technology and how that might be playing a role in the future of DST.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. The argument is basically that the more reliant we are on technology, the less we actually need DST, right?
Makes sense. I mean, our phones and computers just automatically adjust. So it's not like we're relying on sunlight to tell us what time it is anymore.
Exactly. And one of those articles even said that DST could turn into, like, a digital divide where the people who aren't as tech savvy end up carrying more of the burden when the time changes.
Yeah, that's a good point. We got to make sure everyone benefits from technology, not just a select few.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it seems like the future of DST is still totally up in the air.
It really does. But you sent some super insightful research that has definitely helped me understand just how complex this whole thing is.
I'm glad to hear it. And hey, maybe you'll be the one to come up with the solution to this whole DST dilemma. After all, it took someone like Ben Franklin to get the conversation started centuries ago. Maybe you'll be the next big thinker who changes how we view time.
Who knows? Maybe I will. The power of innovation is in everyone's hands. And hey, listeners, thanks for sticking with us on this deep dive into daylight saving time. We hope you learned a thing or two. And be sure to check out the show notes for all those sources we talked about. Until next time, stay curious and keep on learning.